Our guest today is the President and Chief Executive Officer of the Robert R. McCormick Foundation. He has served in this position for nearly 10 years. The mission of the McCormick Foundation is to foster communities of educated, informed, and engaged citizens. The foundation helps develop citizen leaders and works to make life better in our communities. He earned his bachelor's degree from Harvard College and his law degree from Harvard Law School. Ladies and gentlemen, David Hiller. David?
Thank you, Jay. Good afternoon, everyone. It is great to be back at the City Club. We have a very similar mission, and as Jay and I were talking, Colonel McCormick would love the mission of the City Club, and that's bringing all of people like us together to be engaged in the important issues in the life of our city. And what a time to be talking about democracy in Chicagoland, I tell you. So I just have to ask, so how many people here voted in the election last week? Well, awesome. I'm assuming a few of the rest of you were probably not city residents. But in fact, if everybody in our community was as engaged as the members of the City Club, we'd be a lot better off. And here. And the mission that we're on all together is to make that a reality. Before beginning, I have to ask a little bit of a civics quiz, and Phil actually has a gift card. If somebody can somebody identify the image on the left-hand side of that slide? Yes. Yes, very good. You get the gift card. It's a great series. This one was freedom of speech. In the winter of 1943, Norman Rockwell was commissioned to do a series of the four freedoms, which came from Roosevelt's inaugural speech in '41. And they were used on a great tour of America. They reached millions of people, printed millions of copies, and they raised war bonds for the war. So good for you. So. And that's the subject I want to talk some about today. It's democracy and the state of our democracy, and including how it interrelates with our news media and us as citizens and us as consumers of the media. And as billed, I did want to begin with a subject that is itself much in the news, and that is the issue of fake news, which is deliberately false information that people put out there in the hope that a lot of people will believe it. Now, there's another kind of fake news that's different that I'm also going to talk about that we'll get to in a moment. But on the subject of that fake news, almost everybody recognizes this is a serious problem. In fact, 88% of Americans say that this is a real threat to our democracy. And fake news can get in the bones in a whole variety of ways. It takes advantage of all the features of the internet and social media. First of all, it's easy to create and to manipulate digitally. You can stay anonymous and put it out there. And finally, the social networks can spread it like a bad cold. In fact, MIT did a study a couple years ago of 100,000 news messages that reached 3 million people on Twitter, and their study found that false news stories are 70% more likely to be tweeted than true ones. Think of that. Think of what we do with our Twitter accounts. And they also spread 6 times faster. Now, there are in fact a lot of websites out there with tools to create fake news. Believe it or not, there's like dozens of them. And you can pick the headlines and manipulate them, and you take the logos and make up stories, and it's shockingly easy. Literally anybody can do it. And I I do mean anybody. I was going to wait and see what kind of response we get to that and then consider an actual campaign. But I think we'll leave this in the fake news category for now. And it gets worse than this too. The tools of fake news are getting ever more sophisticated. So take a quick look at this video.
We're entering an era in which our enemies can make it look like anyone is saying anything at any point in time. Someone like Jordan Peele. This is a dangerous time. Moving forward, we need to be more vigilant with what we trust from the internet. That's a time when we need to rely on trusted news sources.
So that's a good word of caution from Jordan Peele. Or was that Jordan Peele? And the fact is, you've probably read about some of this, the new algorithms and technology. They call these deep fakes. And they are becoming even digitally harder and harder to sort out whether it was fake or whether it was real. And it's the kind of thing we're going to be battling for a long time to come. Now, some of these things, like the one I put together, may be funny and harmless, but a lot of it's not at all funny and not harmless. And probably the most infamous in recent years was the campaign of Russian disinformation that figured in the Mueller indictment of the Russians. They had literally dozens and dozens of fake sites that they created, and they identified racial, religious, and political subjects, all with the purpose of stirring people up. They even staged real rallies in cities and brought opposing sides together, inflaming them, and reach literally hundreds of thousands of people. But the Russians aren't the only ones. The Myanmar military were behind a systematic campaign on Facebook that for years targeted their country's Rohingya Muslim population. And it's widely known from the human rights groups that follow it that they inflamed a lot of the violence and the killings against the Rohingyas. The Saudis, also well known, led a systematic social media campaign against Jamal Khashoggi with an army of Twitter trolls until they decided that didn't go far enough, and they murdered him. Back here in the States, just after the news broke last year about the pipe bombs directed to prominent Democrats, a conspiracy theory began to circulate that was in fact, the bombs were a trick concocted by people on the left, actually trying to paint conservatives as violent radicals. In a similar vein, a theory spread that George Soros was the one funding the caravan that was coming from Central America, and that got them a twofer, both anti-immigrant and anti-Semitic at the same time. Now, coming from the other direction, the New York Times reported that Democratic operatives had used similar disinformation tactics against the Republican Roy Moore in the Alabama Senate primary last year. So fake news is a problem. It's a real problem, but it's not our only problem. There is, as I mentioned, that other kind of fake news, and this is the label that President Trump and others use as part of their assault on any news and any news media that they don't like. In the same vein as his labeling all media the enemy of the people. Now, I think most of us would recognize this undercuts our core values and brings into question our democratic institutions, and is not an example that we want to set, but it is an example that gets carried on in other parts of the world. It gets picked up by autocrats all over the world. The number of journalists jailed around the world reached a record high of 262 last year, with over half of them imprisoned in Turkey, China, and Egypt. And many of the crimes for which they're indicted are actually labeled perpetrating false news. Now, there is some good news. The American people still overwhelmingly believe that a free press is essential to our democracy. The not so good news is they don't think the press is doing a very good job of it all the time. 43% of Americans say the news media is doing poorly or very poorly, and only 28% say doing well or very well. 68% say the news media favor one side when covering political or social issues. But that also breaks down to 86% of Republicans and 52% of Democrats who think that. Carrying on, only 44% of Americans said they could name an objective news source, but the ones they named might surprise you. As is true with a lot of media and a lot of us, they are the ones that we watch, that they watch, even though they're very different. And so the fragmentation of media that this demonstrates has also made it a good deal more polarized, as we all know. And this is not an accident. Polarization is a business model in the media that started, or at least really got going, with the talk radio in the 90s and then spread through cable TV and the internet. Because as they say in the software business, this is not a bug, but a feature. And it is, of course, also a political strategy on both sides. Just look at this recent example of the Covington Catholic High School students at the Lincoln Memorial. I'm sure you all saw this picture. It was all over the world. And our country brought itself to near hysteria through a combination of rushing to judgment, incomplete reporting, and retreat into stereotypes on all sides. See, we, in fact, don't need Russian internet trolls to disrupt and divide us. We're fully capable of doing that to ourselves. So what can we do about this? I think it's a question Franklin would have been asking. Remember, he answered leaving the Constitutional Convention, asked what form of government we have. He said, we'll have a republic if you can keep it. So how do we keep it? So I think there are at least three things I want to go a little further into. One is there are things you can do to fight fake news directly. Secondly, we can build our capacity as citizens, including those that of our young people, and we can strengthen local journalism. There's a fourth big subject for another time, which is what can we do to improve the institutions of government and their transparency and effectiveness and the ethics in government, but some of that we'll leave for another day. So, first of all, rooting out disinformation. There are things to do directly. This is what many of the leading digital platforms like Facebook and YouTube say they are doing. Indeed, between the two of them, they announced they will deploy more than 20,000 people to identify and remove fake and false sites from their websites. And we'll see that, frankly, so far my sense is their track record of doing this has been pretty mixed. There is also a dramatic rise in fact-checking sites like factcheck.org, run by the Annenberg Center, and PolitiFact, which is owned and run by the Poynter Institute. And in fact, as many of you may know, there's a great local Illinois, Chicago site, PolitiFact Illinois, that is done in partnership with the BGA, and I highly commend it to you. There are also some new trustworthiness rating services, one called NewsGuard, that you can put on your browser, and when you go to a media site, after they vet various sites and then indicate a rating of reliability. That was founded by Steve Brill and is currently run by Jim Warren, who is a former Chicago Tribune colleague. So, but technology can be part of the solution, but it can't be the only answer. We are never going to be able to screen all the false information out of the world. And technology isn't the root problem anyway. A lot of it's our culture and our politics. Because to a considerable extent, people are going to read what they want to read, and they're going to believe what they want to believe. So to that extent, we're all part of the issue, and we all have to be part of the solution. In short, as I would say, we all need to be better citizens. And that starts with our families and also our schools and the role that schools play and always have played historically in preparing the next generation of citizens. Now, in 2015, with the support of many people in the room, Illinois enacted a law to bring civics back into all of our high schools. We had been, yes, thank you all for the support. And then when we were here the last, the legislation was just coming up in 2015. And Illinois had been one of only a handful of states that didn't require it, and now we do. And for the last 3 years, again with support of many of the amazing nonprofits and some of the funders in the room, we've been in the process of implementing this and bringing quality civics back to all of our high schools, including by recent count, this has involved reaching over 10,000 of our wonderful teachers all across the state to make sure they've got the tools and the resources to do a great job teaching civics. Now, the course is built around practices that are proven to build the skills and habits that citizens need. So, it starts with great teachers and great instruction, but then it extends to important things and difficult things like being able to sit around in rooms like this and have difficult conversations on controversial issues and being able to do it without getting into a fight and being disagreeable. And that is such, and the time is right in high school before a lot of the later habits, other kind of habits are set in, when our young people can learn these things. And teachers, when they're well equipped to do it, are in a great position to do it. Another thing that's part of this, going to the subject of what to believe, is media literacy, or news literacy as it's called, has to be a very important part of that, and at CPS we'll hear it is. And Peter Adams of the News Literacy Project, we're one of the great leaders in this and working with the schools to do this, because it's, as we know, it goes back to critical skills as a citizen are both to want to seek out information that's believable and then to know how to find it. And in addition, providing, as we're now able to do, universal access to this kind of quality civic learning is also going to help us bridge some of the racial and ethnic gaps that we've got in our schools and in our civic life, that historically kids of color haven't had the same access to quality civic learning experiences. There's a huge gap you may read about in who gets in, who has access to AP courses, access to extracurricular activities, and that kind of thing just continues to feed the gaps that then persist into life as a citizen, where people then aren't able or feel they have the access or the capability to participate in civic life to the same extent as other people. And we need to fix that. But I was going to say, don't take it from me. To take it from me, I want to introduce again a few of our leaders from CPS that have made Chicago a complete model for excellence in doing this work. As you heard, we have Janice Jackson, CEO of Chicago Public Schools here. I hope most of you also know LaTanya McDade, our wonderful Chief Education Officer, LaTanya. And Heather Van Benthuysen. Heather, where are you? Who is the head of the Office of Social Sciences and Civic Engagement, that's on the front line doing a lot of this work. And I believe Janice is going to agree to say a few words about how things are going in CPS. Do we have the mic here? There, Brad.
David, for ceding some of your time. First of all, I want to speak on behalf of Chicago Public Schools, but really the great work that Heather and her team are leading, and work that has been happening for many years, even prior to my taking on the role of CEO of CPS. But I can tell you as a former principal how important programs like Democracy Schools, one of which Westinghouse College Prep, my former school, eventually became, was so important. And it was important because of partnerships like the ones that we have with the McCormick Foundation. A few things that's important to know is that Chicago Public Schools has made this a huge part of our mission and vision. As we have improved graduation rates rapidly, we've done that by strengthening graduation requirements. And one of those things is making civics a requirement for graduation. So it shows that we can strengthen those requirements while also holding true to core values. And one of our core values is making sure that our students are able to be great citizens and great residents as a result of their time in CPS. Some of the ways in which we do that, McCormick supports. We have taken on the mission of making sure that there is a student voice committee in every single one of our high schools and moving that down to our middle schools. You should clap for that. We're going beyond student councils and really making sure that our students know how to use and activate their voice, and partnerships like the ones that we have with MCFA help us to do that work, and McCormick supports that. We're also excited about what David is talking about today, which is really making sure that while we live in a society where our students are exposed to so much information earlier in life, faster, it's very dynamic and changes on a daily basis, this notion that we have to be not only savvy, but able to weed out what's accurate and what's factual is increasingly important in this environment. And McCormick has committed to supporting Chicago Public Schools to do that great work. And I have no doubt that that commitment will be longstanding and robust, as they have been committed to Chicago Public Schools for a number of years and through some of our toughest times. So I'm just happy to partner with you on this important initiative and look forward to doing my part, as everybody in this room should do, to educate the next generation of leaders for our country. Thank you.
Right. Janice, thank you so much. And it is, if you travel around the country, you will see Chicago is being lifted up as a model of what a large district can do and be a leader in this civic learning work. And there is more work to do. As Janice mentioned, we need to bring civics into the earlier grades. Many of you, I think, have heard of the National Assessment of Educational Progress, the so-called country's report card. But that report card in the category of civics reports pretty poor grades. It says that only 23% of 8th graders are proficient in civics. And that number has not budged in like 4 decades. So we need to bring the same improvement that we're doing in the high school down into the middle grades, and there is an opportunity to do that. Legislation has been introduced that would bring civics to the middle school grades. The sponsor of the legislation, Representative Camille Lilly, wasn't able to be with us because the General Assembly is in session today, but I'm going to ask my colleagues, Sean Healy, who heads up our democracy program, for a quick report on this legislation. Sean, as many of you may know, led the charge on the legislation for the high schools and is going to be doing the same with colleagues on the middle schools. So, Sean, what's the news? Sean, back over on the side. We're all over.
So you all have a flyer on your chairs, in addition to the future speakers at the City Club, information on House Bill 2265, which is legislation that would do very much the same thing we've done at the high school level, bring a civics course to middle school, and as is clear on the slide up front, integrate best practices. So it's not just civics, teaching civics, but it's how we teach civics. So of course we're talking about government institutions, but also engaging young people in conversations about issues that matter to them, engaging them in service to their community that's tied back to what they're learning in class, and simulating democratic processes. So this bill is in committee in the House right now. There are actually some instructions on the backside about how to file an electronic witness slip. A colleague of mine did this, took about 2.5 minutes, so one of the easiest forms of civic engagement. I'm proud to say we already have 701 proponent witness slips submitted for this. We make the case on this document. The need is acute. The marginalization of social studies and civics is most pronounced in K through 8. And there's a big opportunity to integrate civics into the middle grades. And I should say one more shout out for CPS. they're very well positioned to take this mandate on. They're already moving high-quality civics into the middle grades, as Janice Jackson suggested. So please take a look at this document. If you're concerned about the state of this state, the state of this city, I would suggest to you the long-term solution lies with our young people and preparing them with the knowledge, the skills, the behaviors, and the attitudes necessary for informed, effective engagement in our democracy throughout life. Best way to do that is to teach them. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. So you will find it a civics lesson in itself to file a digital support slip, and you can do this. It's not that hard. It takes a couple minutes. It took me a couple minutes longer than that, but do it. You can do it, and you can do it with your family over dinner and talk about the issue. And so thank you for that support. I do want to additionally call out Justice Burke, who has been an outstanding advocate for civic learning and civic education, including in her unique role as a justice, championing the part of that to make sure that people are understanding the third branch of our government as well as the executive and the legislative. And so thank you, Justice Burke, for doing that. So I want to return to the subject of journalism, which remains critical to our democracy. And you remember Thomas Jefferson saying that if he had to choose, he'd rather have newspapers without government than government without newspapers. Now, happily, we aren't at the point where we need to make that choice. We still have a lot of, we're blessed with a lot of news media in Chicagoland, and a lot of us doing terrific work. But the world for media, news media overall, like most other things in the world, has been turned upside down by the internet. And particularly, it's pulling away readers and advertisers. And to give you one idea, the challenge, the Google and Facebook together now get 60% of all the advertising on the internet. 60% of all of it. And the other billion websites divide up the rest of it. But partly as a result of that, we've lost more than half of newsroom jobs since 2003. Most of those have come out of the newspapers. Local journalism has been particularly hard hit. One example, if you look at in Springfield 20 years ago had like 45 or 50 full-time reporters covering what was going on in Springfield. They're now well under 10 who cover it on a full-time basis. And again, my hats off and thanks to all the media in the city who are still doing a terrific job on all sorts of reporting, including enterprise reporting. But it's the field we need to continue to strengthen. And as part of this, now there are a host of new nonprofit news efforts, including there are more than 200 across the country, and there are several here in Chicago. And as the newer entrants to the media world, I thought we'd introduce 3 of them. And they're making really important contributions to the journalism in our city, and they need your support. The new model for journalism is partly supported by philanthropy, including individual contributions to be able to do the important work of having real reporters out on the street. And so first among them, I'd like to introduce Propublica Illinois, which was, the Illinois part was founded in 2017. It's part of the National Propublica organization. But please meet Louise Kiernan, who's their editor-in-chief. And where's Louise? Louise is an extraordinary journalist and editor, including having 18 years with the Chicago Tribune. So over to you, Louise.
When David said this would be a pop-up event, he really meant we would be popping up.
Yeah.
From the audience. Is that better? So hi, everyone. I'm Louise Kiernan. As David said, I'm editor-in-chief of Propublica Illinois. We are the first regional operation of Propublica, which is a nonprofit, nonpartisan newsroom dedicated to producing investigative journalism that creates real-world change. We've been in operation here for about 16 months. In that time, we've published almost 200 stories, including more than a dozen major investigations. Trust, transparency, collaboration, and community engagement are the cornerstones of our mission here. We do the vast majority of our work with other media organizations in order to reach a broader and more diverse audience. So far, we've worked with dozens of local, state, and national media organizations, including both the organizations you'll hear from after me and most everybody that I see here in this room. In addition to that, we make almost all our work available for reprinting by other news organizations for free. And so far, hundreds of media outlets everywhere have taken us up on the offer to steal our stories. And that means everybody from the Belleville News Democrat in Belleville, Illinois, to El Dia News in Spain. Also, in the interest of transparency, we put up all the data behind our stories on our website so that anybody can access it and use it for their own reasons. And we started an occasional column called Ask Propublica Illinois, where we answer readers' questions. And those have included tough, thoughtful questions like, how do you keep bias out of stories? And how do you vet anonymous sources? For us, we think it's essential that the experience of the people most affected by the issues we cover inform and shape our reporting. And what that looks like in the real world to us is it looks like conducting a series of performance-based workshops in communities around the state to get residents talking to one another and to us about issues of concern to them. It means reaching out both in the real world and online to people who are impacted by our reporting. Reaching out that might mean publishing the journal of a woman whose son was involved in a research study gone awry, or mailing out copies of stories about property tax inequity to people who we knew were infected by this issue but probably wouldn't see it online. And we also hold events to bring in even more people to our stories. In fact, just last night, more than 100 people showed up to talk about parking tickets in the city of Chicago. Believe me, if you want to get people worked up, write about parking tickets. So for us, the most important measure of success is not page views and it's not Twitter followers, it's impact. And I'm really proud to say that 16 months in, we've already begun to make significant impact on issues of importance to all of us here in this room. Our reporting on how the city of Chicago's ticketing system unfairly targets poor minority drivers has led to a series of reforms in the city council, as well as the creation of a multi-agency task force that's examining an overhaul of the system, and it's become a discussion point in the mayoral race. Our reporting on the use of gang databases by area law enforcement agencies. We were the first news organization to publish the Chicago Police Department's gang database. That has led to changes in the way those databases are accessed and managed. And in fact, just last week, an ordinance was passed to dismantle the database kept by the Cook County Sheriff's Office. We did a series of investigations into children who have been trapped in psychiatric hospitals beyond their release dates because the state can't find them homes to go to. As a result of that reporting, an outside monitor was appointed to oversee agency reforms. A class action lawsuit was filed, and at one particularly troubled facility, children were immediately removed. And the final example I'll mention is we wrote some stories about how young men at a juvenile facility in southern Illinois were being given disproportionate adult prison sentences for minor infractions. In fact, some of them were getting a longer prison sentence for spitting on a guard than Jason Van Dyke got in the Laquan McDonald case. And as a result of that reporting, those young men's sentences were commuted by the governor, Governor Rauner, on his way out. So we're really excited and proud to be a grantee from McCormick, and really looking forward to continuing to work and to grow here in Illinois. I'd love to say more, but I want you to hear from Bettina and from Cassie as well. So thank you.
Thanks, Louise. Keep up the great work. So education clearly is one of the most critical issues in the city. It is also an area of reporting that has seen significant declines in the full-time reporters committed to covering education. Happily, Chalkbeat launched in Chicago last year to report on education stories. So please meet Cassie Walker Burke, their founding Chicago bureau chief, who came to Chalkbeat from Crane's Chicago Business, and before that, Chicago Magazine. Cassie.
Thank you, David. Thanks, Louise. So I'm going to go with David's quiz earlier and ask you 2 questions. 1, how many of you have heard of Chalkbeat? Oh, okay. Thank you. That's really exciting. I expected less. But if you haven't heard of Chalkbeat, we are a new nonprofit, nonpartisan education news outlet that is telling the story of public education here in Chicago. Chalkbeat is actually a national organization. We have 7 bureaus in 7 cities, and Chicago is the youngest. We launched last summer. My second question for you, this is a little bit harder. But if a measure of a world-class city is the opportunities that it provides for its children, what sort of grade would you give Chicago? I want you to think about that for a second. I believe that journalism, and I have to stress local journalism, plays such a valuable role in that work. Education is a very partisan field, so having a non-biased, not rooted in advocacy publication telling the story of schools is critical. But also, so is using the spotlight to show stories, such as a story we published in December called How It Feels to Be Javion, a story about a 16-year-old boy who's 2 years from graduation, but reads at a 2nd grade level. Javion is not an outlier in Chicago. 3 of 10 adults here struggles with basic literacy. Other stories that we've done, we've looked at universal pre-K, the universal pre-K rollout, and chronicled some of the gulfs in communication between the city and the providers. The impact of such a story is tens of thousands of children. And we're in the first year of a 4-year rollout, and it's a story we'll continue to cover. We've also sat down with the candidates for governor last fall in partnership with WBEZ, and we had a deep discussion just about education policy, not some of the other things that were being lobbied about in the campaigns. We did the same with the mayoral candidates, and we will do so now again now that we're entering a runoff. We're not even a year old, and already Chalkbeat's work has been cited by academics, by legislators, in public hearings, and a metric I'm really, really proud of, 40% of our readers in a survey had taken something they learned in a Chalkbeat story and spoken to a teacher or an administrator at their child's school, or at their own school if they were a teacher. That's something that directly impacts the learning of our kids in classrooms. And we're just getting started. This month, I'm excited to tell you about a series called Office Hours that we're launching, where we go to communities and we make ourselves present and we talk to people there about what's working and what's not in their schools. We just got the keys last week to a new collaborative workspace with 9 media and tech organizations called Civic House, and we're going to be partnering to bring public information to people to make it easier to find what they want to know. And as for those stories that I mentioned earlier, we're going to continue to follow them. Literacy, early childhood education, where the people that we're voting on stand on important information about schools. So back to the question I asked you at the top. If a measure of a world-class city is how it treats its children, what grade would you give Chicago? As we all work together to improve the city's grade, I cannot stress enough how important local journalism, bringing facts, covering meetings, being there day in and day out is to that conversation. And you, all the people in this room, can actually support us in what we do, and it's actually really easy. You can follow us on social media. You can go to our webpage and look at it. You can tell a friend about Chalkbeat. You can invite us to an event that you think it's important and that we should cover. And you can sign up for our newsletters. They're free. They sum up the education news of the week. But that's really important to us. And you actually have, just with your eyeballs and your computer usage, a lot of influence on how local media and local journalism survives and maybe thrives in Chicago. So thank you.
Thanks, Cassie. Finally, one of the issues in journalism in Chicago is how our neighborhoods are covered, and how much they're covered, how they're covered, who covers them, what stories are told, what stories are not told. And there is a new entity, City Bureau, that was launched in 2015 to address these issues. And here to tell us about City Bureau is one of their founders, Bettina Chang, formerly with DNA Info and Chicago Magazine. Bettina?
Hang with me. Hello? Okay,
There we go.
excellent. Hello, everyone. I'm very excited to be here today. Thank you, David, for the invitation. And so we're going to do a little civic participation here. I know that that's what you guys are into, right? So take a look at this map up here, and I want to hear just some guesses as to what that map is. And just shout them out. I want to hear some of the guesses up here. Income, okay. Crime, okay. Coverage. Public comments. Voting patterns, all right. Educational opportunities, great. So these are all really, really excellent guesses. The reason I put it up here, as some of you are now guessing, is that almost every map about Chicago looks the same, okay? That is it's like a dark joke that data journalists make. Like, don't make a map, they all look the same. This is actually a map, more lightheartedly, about pet registrations. In green are pit bulls, and in blue are Labradors. Okay. So I bring that up because it's a... All right, I know you guys are like, yeah, that's me, sorry. So I bring it up because I think everyone in this room knows that Chicago is a very inequitable city. That segregation is one of the biggest problems that plagues us in this city, and it's holding us back from true greatness. And sort of like what Cassie was saying, you know, how do we improve our grade when it comes to people's access to opportunity? One of the things that I think is clear about Chicago's local news ecosystem is that although we are very lucky to have hundreds of newspapers, that's right, I don't say two newspaper town because there are hundreds of local newspapers, that people in the city are served very differently by all of the news organizations here. And people in the city have very different local news and information needs. So if, I think there's, yeah, there we go. So City Bureau was founded in 2015, and I can't believe that our organization is older than the two that just spoke, because we're usually not in that kind of position. But we were founded in 2015 to address these local news and information inequities. And when you ask people in the city of Chicago, do they feel like their neighborhoods are properly represented by news organizations, people in downtown and the north side, the Labrador owners, are more likely to say that news accurately represents their neighborhoods and that the right people in their neighborhoods are quoted in news outlets compared to people on the south and west sides. And I think that we should all think about that a little bit, and what does that mean about the way that we're serving this big and diverse city that we love so much. The interesting thing is that when we ask them a question that says, how likely are you to volunteer to help out by going to a public meeting and taking notes for your local news outlet? People on the south and west sides are more likely than people on the north and downtown areas to say they would do that. So people who are least served by these institutions that purport to serve them are most likely to want to contribute because they want to be able to get in there and really get involved. So what I'm here to say is that I think that when we talk about journalism, in Chicago specifically, again, a very, very robust news ecosystem, we can't just talk about making more journalism because we're living in an inequitable city. So how do we make journalism that's more equitable and that truly serves all Chicagoans at the places where they need to be served? And that means that we have to fundamentally rethink the ways that we produce, distribute, and consume news and information. And that's why City Bureau has 3 different, very dark-looking programs. That's my fault. So we have created a suite of 3 different programs. City Bureau is a Civic Journalism Lab based in Woodlawn. We are member-supported, and we think that our mission is to bring journalists and community members together in order to create more equitable media and to encourage civic participation. So you can see here that the point is not necessarily to create more content, right? Because we have content flooding our feeds. There's a fire hose. We actually don't need more. What we need is content that actually is going to serve us, or experiences and skills that will get us there. And so we have the Reporting Fellowship, which is our first program in which we train emerging career reporters of all different backgrounds to actually co-mentor one another as they produce journalism in a way that's community-centered. And that often means, and City Bureau specifically covers the south and west sides for reasons that I just pointed out before. But that means that we are training a new cohort of young reporters, not necessarily young actually, but reporters who are new to the industry, who are ready to critique some of the harmful practices that exist in the industry. And we're training them to do really great neighborhood coverage, which you've actually seen published in all sorts of publications, including Chalkbeat in collaboration with Propublica and WBZ, the Sun-Times, all sorts of different organizations in Chicago that we've been very lucky to collaborate with. We have a public newsroom, which is our...
We're gonna.
You need an editor. We have to cut you.
Yeah, we'll take one.
It's true, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Please check us out online, thanks.
We're going to leave it to time for, but thank Bettina. So thanks all to our journalism. The point of today, and thank you for listening to the new media voices in the city. As I look out and see this room and see the journalism that's going on in the city and see the schools and what the schools are doing, I am personally filled with hope that we're going to be able to be a model for how communities can really come together and solve problems. I don't know that sitting here will be able to solve everything that's going on in Washington, but I know that we can solve things that are going on in the city. And Jay, thank you for what the City Club does for that, and thank all of you for how you contribute to that.
David, thank you very much. Don't go away. And what the folks, Bettina and Chalkbeat and Propublica, what you had to say was so interesting. You're all going to have to come back, talk to the City Club again. But you've got to leave us a little time to ask for questions, okay? Please, thank you very much. Okay, we just have several questions here. The first one is from Professor Nick Kacharobis from DePaul University. David, what advice do you have for citizens who want to seek out real news facts about candidates in the heat of an impending election? Do you think the high number of candidates and unclear information led to lower turnout February 26th?
Well, interesting on the last point, for a municipal election, this was actually one of the higher ones recently at 35% of registered voters, not nearly what we need it to be. The fact is there are a lot of good resources online on the judicial front. There's a site, Injustice Watch, that's a partner with several other of the nonprofit journalists. There's a website, go to Shy Votes, which many of these organizations are in, where they pool coverage and resources to make selections. Ballotpedia is a great source of information to review candidates, and so there's very good resources there.
And by the way, I want to mention that with Dr. Jackson's leadership, we had a number of high school students who worked as election judges on Election Day. And they were probably the best judges that we had. There are a lot of folks with a lot of silver hair and balding spots who work as judges. And, you know, we do everything by computer now. These high school students, they master it in 5 minutes. People my age, they need 6 hours of training, and I'm not sure they master it. Okay, next question. This is from David Cohn with the Union League Club of Chicago. What do you think of the News Literacy Project and its effort to educate young people about how to tell the differences between real and fake news?
Well, thank you, David. I'm a big fan. They're partners. They're one of the leaders in the field. I mentioned Peter Adams, and a couple of his colleagues are here. They've developed some amazing curriculum, including an online platform called Checkology that's available really to all teachers, all schools, all across the country. And it's an essential set of skills and needs to be incorporated into all of our civic learning.
Okay, and the final question, David. This is from Gene Gaitis, who's affiliated with Denton's. With the threat of fake news and misinformation growing, how do you see the role of librarians and information professionals changing to help address this threat? More importantly, how do we need to train the next generation of librarians and information professionals to equip them to be the most effective in defeating this threat? You want to bet Eugene Gaitis is an information professional or a librarian?
But that is a great and very important question. I'm a huge fan of our libraries. We're blessed, as you all know, here in Chicago have the Chicago Public Library System. They are so well positioned to be the lead in doing a lot of this work with the resources they have and being located in all the neighborhoods across the city. And we've done some programs with the libraries, but I think expanding and with training what the libraries and librarians do to help bring these skills to all of our communities is a fabulous idea.
Great. Folks, let's give David and our other participants, Propublica, Chalkbeat, and Bettina's group, a big round of applause.